You kneel in the cathedral of St. Macarius, your breath forming small clouds in the perpetual chill that seeps through 10-meter thick walls of consecrated stone. Around you, 10,000 voices rise in perfect unison, reciting the litany of devotion with the mechanical precision that 4 decades of imperial conditioning has drilled into every soul on this world. The Gothic arches stretch impossibly high above, their shadows dancing in the flicker of a million candles, each flame a prayer, each prayer a plea for the Emperor's protection. In his name we find purpose. In his light we find truth. In his service we find salvation. The words roll off your tongue without thought, muscle memory, from 30 years of morning prayers. Your knees ache against the cold marble floor, worn smooth by countless generations of the faithful. The incense burns heavy in your nostrils, sanctified promethium mixed with crushed saints' bones, they say, though you've never been certain if that's doctrine or superstition. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you should be focused on the words, on the rhythm, on the collective surrender of individual will to the greater glory of humanity's master. Instead, you find yourself watching her. She kneels 17 rows ahead and 4 positions to the left, her dark hair covered by the regulation devotional cowl that all citizens wear during morning prayers. But there's something about the way she holds her head, the particular angle of her neck as she bows forward, that draws your attention like a moth to forbidden flame. When she lifts her face during the responsive verse, you catch a glimpse of her profile, the curve of her cheek illuminated by candlelight, her lips moving silently as she forms the sacred words. Emperor, forgive me, you think, but she's beautiful. The thought strikes you like a physical blow. Not because of its content, but because of its implications. You've just committed your first act of heresy. In the span of a heartbeat, your entire world shifts. The cathedral that moments ago felt like a sanctuary now feels like a trap. Those 10,000 voices that were once a comforting chorus now sound like the hunting calls of predators. The candles that provided warmth now cast suspicious shadows. Every servoskull hovering silently through the cathedral's vast nave could be recording, analyzing, measuring the dilation of your pupils, the elevation of your heart rate, the subtle shift in your breathing pattern. You force your eyes back to the prayer book in your hands, but the damage is done. Your pulse hammers against your throat, and you're certain that every soul around you can hear it. The woman 3 places to your right, does she glance at you with suspicion, or is that your imagination? The man behind you, is his breathing pattern different now, as if he's trying to listen to yours? Paranoia is a survival trait they taught you in the Schola Preparatoria. The faithful have nothing to fear from scrutiny, only the corrupt worry about being watched. But you're worrying now, aren't you? Because in the space between one prayer and the next, you've discovered something more dangerous than a heretical thought. You've discovered that part of you doesn't care if they're watching. Part of you wants to look at her again, consequences be damned. The servoskull drifts closer, its mechanical eye focusing on your section with the cold precision of imperial technology. You know what it's measuring, cortisol levels in your sweat, micro-expressions that betray emotional states, the thermal signature of blood flow patterns that might indicate particular attachment or divided loyalty. Terms you've heard whispered in the deep factories, spoken of only in the darkest rumors about what happens to those who love unwisely. You think about Matthias from the upper hive, who worked the same shift rotation as you for 15 years. One day he was there, efficiently performing his duties in Service Bay 7, and the next his workstation was empty, his name struck from the duty rosters as if he had never existed. The foreman, when pressed, would only say that Matthias had been reassigned to other duties in service to the Emperor. But you remembered seeing him with a woman from the textile district, remembered the way they would time their ration collections to coincide, the small smile she would give him when she thought no one was looking. You remember and you understand now what you didn't then, that love is not just forbidden in the Imperium of man. It's hunted. The prayer ends. 10,000 souls rise in perfect synchronization, the sound of their movement like a great wave breaking against stone. You stand with them, your legs unsteady, your prayer book trembling slightly in your hands. As the congregation begins to file out through the massive bronze doors, you steal one more glance toward the 17th row. She's looking back. For a moment that lasts an eternity, your eyes meet across the sea of cowled heads and moving bodies. Her gaze is dark, intelligent, and somehow knowing, as if she's seen the same realization dawn in your face that you see reflected in hers. There's no smile, no gesture. Such things would be suicide in a place like this. But there's something else, something that makes your breath catch and your heart race even faster than fear. Recognition, not of your face, but of your situation. She knows, just as you know, that both of you have just crossed a line from which there may be no return. Then the crowd surges, carrying you both in different directions toward the exits, and the moment is broken. But as you're swept along in the tide of humanity, you catch sight of a servoskull pivoting to track your movement, its lens whirring as it adjusts focus. Did it record that exchange? Did it catalog the microsecond of connection between two souls who have forgotten their place in the greater machinery of the Imperium? You don't know. But as you step out into the ash-gray morning light of Hive Tertius, you realize something that chills you more than the perpetual winter wind. You don't care if it did. Because for the first time in your 30 years of faithful service to the God Emperor of mankind, you felt something that makes you want to risk everything. And that, more than any heretical thought or forbidden desire, is the most dangerous thing of all. The Inquisition doesn't just hunt heretics. It hunts the human heart itself. And yours, you realize with growing horror, has just painted a target on your back. To understand what you've just done, what you've just risked, you need to understand the machinery that now turns its attention toward you. The Inquisition's campaign against emotional heresy didn't begin with paranoia. It began with necessity, born from the ashes of the Vaccinide Prime incident 3 centuries ago. Picture, if you will, a world not unlike your own. A loyal imperial world, its citizens faithful servants of the Emperor, its tithes paid in full, its regiments answering the call to crusade without question. Vaccinide Prime was a model of imperial compliance for 800 years, right up until the moment it wasn't. The corruption began, as all Slaneshi corruption begins, with something beautiful, with love. A cult that called itself the Covenant of Hearts had discovered something that the Imperium has spent millennia trying to suppress, that human emotional bonds, when pushed to their absolute limit, when refined and intensified beyond normal parameters, create psychic resonances that certain entities find appetizing. The cultists didn't start as heretics. They started as lovers, husbands and wives who wanted to feel more deeply, parents who wanted to love their children with greater intensity, friends who sought bonds that transcended mere companionship. They developed rituals, innocent at first, to enhance emotional connection, meditation practices to synchronize heartbeats, breathing exercises to share consciousness, chemical compounds to intensify the neurological experience of attachment. Within 50 years, Vaccinide Prime had become a beacon of devotion that could be seen from the warp. Not devotion to the Emperor, though they maintained that pretense until the very end, but devotion to each other. They had learned to love so completely, so utterly, that their combined emotional energy tore a permanent rift between realms. When the Inquisition finally arrived, they found a world where 1 billion people had achieved perfect emotional unity. They had also found a world where that unity had summoned something from beyond the veil, something that fed on the intensity of human connection and grew stronger with every kiss, every embrace, every whispered word of affection. The exterminatus took 14 hours. The investigation took 30 years. What they discovered in those ruins changed imperial policy forever. Love, the investigators concluded, was not just a distraction from duty or a source of divided loyalty. Love was a vector for corruption. Emotional attachment created psychic vulnerabilities that could be exploited by the enemies of mankind. The stronger the attachment, the greater the vulnerability. The deeper the love, the wider the doorway for things that should never be allowed entry into reality. The solution was elegant in its brutality. Eliminate the vulnerability by eliminating the capacity for attachment itself. Thus was born the Hereticus Amatus, the Inquisition's specialized branch dedicated to the identification and eradication of dangerous emotional bonds, and thus began humanity's systematic campaign against its own heart. You live now in the perfected result of 3 centuries of refinement. Every world in the Imperium operates under the emotional purity protocols established by Inquisitor Lord Vex the Elder. Yes, the same family line that now watches your sector. Every cathedral contains monitoring equipment designed to detect the telltale signs of particular attachment. Every citizen undergoes regular psychological evaluation to ensure that their loyalties remain properly directed toward the Emperor alone. The technology is impressive in its thoroughness. Servoskulls equipped with Auspex arrays can monitor the biometric signatures of up to 10,000 individuals simultaneously, flagging anomalies in heart rate, breathing patterns, galvanic skin response, and micromuscular tension that might indicate emotional investment in another person. Vox thieves record every conversation, searching for linguistic patterns that suggest developing attachments, the subtle changes in speech rhythm that occur when humans begin to care for each other, the unconscious mirroring of vocal patterns that indicate psychological bonding. But the technology is only the beginning. The real genius of the system lies in its human elements. Every neighborhood has its watchers, citizens who have proven their devotion by successfully reporting suspicious emotional activity. They're not paid informants, you understand. They're volunteers, true believers who genuinely accept that love is corruption and that reporting it is an act of service to humanity's survival. Your neighbor, the one who always greets you politely during evening rations. She's reported 17 couples in the past decade. The confessor who provides spiritual guidance during your monthly devotionals. He's trained to identify the vocal patterns and body language that indicate romantic attachment, and he files detailed reports after every session. The mathematical scope of the surveillance is staggering. On your world alone, a single hive city among millions, the Inquisition processes approximately 12,000 emotional surveillance reports every day. They investigate 847 cases of suspected particular attachment each month. Of those, roughly 200 result in formal proceedings for emotional heresy. Multiply that by the billion worlds of the Imperium, and you begin to understand the scale of humanity's war against its own nature. Every day, millions of people like you discover feelings they're not supposed to have. Every day, thousands of them are caught, processed, and corrected. The theological justification is ironclad, supported by 10,000 years of imperial doctrine. The Emperor, blessed be his name, represents the perfect object of human devotion. He is infinite, eternal, and worthy of complete emotional surrender. Any love given to another human being is love stolen from him. Any attachment formed with a mortal soul is an attachment that weakens your bond with the immortal master of mankind. Let your heart be a fortress with but one gate, reads the Codex Amaticus, and let that gate open only for him who sits upon the golden throne. It's beautiful in its way, a perfect system designed to create perfect servants of a perfect master. Humanity refined, purified, elevated above the messy complications of personal attachment that have plagued the species since its earliest days. No jealousy, because there are no relationships to be jealous of. No heartbreak, because there are no hearts invested in breakable things. No conflict between duty and desire, because desire has been systematically eliminated from the equation. The only problem, of course, is that it requires the complete suppression of everything that makes humans human. But that's a small price to pay for survival in a galaxy where emotions can literally damn souls, isn't it? Where the wrong feeling felt too strongly can open doorways for entities that view your entire species as prey. Where love itself has been weaponized by the enemies of mankind. These are the questions that the Hereticus Amatus forces you to confront. Is it better to live as a hollow shell of humanity if that hollow shell can serve the Emperor effectively. Is it better to survive without love than to risk damnation with it? Standing in the shadow of the cathedral, watching the servoskulls drift through the ash-gray sky like mechanical angels of judgment, you realize that these questions are no longer academic. Because somewhere in that crowd dispersing from morning prayers is a woman whose glance has already begun to damn you both. And the worst part, the part that makes your hands shake as you walk back toward the hab blocks, is that you're not sure you care about the answers anymore. The machinery of suspicion grinds ever forward, processing millions of souls through its careful mechanisms of observation and correction. But for the first time in your life, you want to be more than just another cog in that machine. You want to be human, even if humanity itself has become the enemy. 3 days pass before you see her again. 3 days of normal routine, work shift in Manufacturing Bay 12, evening rations in Communal Hall 7, mandatory recreation period in Exercise Yard. See 3 days of pretending that nothing has changed, while every servoskull feels like a personal threat. Every casual conversation with coworkers feels like a potential trap. Every moment of forced normalcy reminds you of the secret burning in your chest. Her name is Lyanna. You learn this not through introduction, but through careful observation during the 4th day's morning prayers. She carries her identification tablet in her left hand rather than her right, a minor deviation from standard protocol that draws a barely perceptible correction from Confessor Matthias. "Citizen Lyanna Corvus," he murmurs, just loudly enough for you to hear from your position 12 rows behind her. Remember that proper devotional posture includes all aspects of physical presentation. Lyanna Corvus. The name fits her somehow, elegant and strong, with the hint of old Terran nobility that suggests her family line has served the Imperium for millennia. You file it away like a treasure, this first concrete piece of information about the woman who has unknowingly set your world ablaze. But knowing her name is dangerous. Names make things real. Names make people into individuals rather than anonymous faces in the crowd. And individuals, you've been taught since childhood, are luxuries that servants of the Emperor cannot afford. Still, you find yourself testing the syllables silently as you kneel in prayer. Lyanna. 3 beats like a heartbeat. 3 sounds that somehow contain all the longing you've never allowed yourself to feel. The real breakthrough comes during the 5th day's devotional service. You've positioned yourself more carefully now, calculating the sight lines and crowd patterns to catch glimpses of her without appearing to stare. It's a delicate mathematics. Too obvious and you'll trigger the surveillance protocols. Too subtle and you'll learn nothing about the woman who has become the center of your carefully controlled universe. She's holding her prayer book differently today. Not dramatically, not in any way that would register as abnormal to the casual observer. But where most citizens grip their devotionals with both hands, thumbs aligned with the text margins as prescribed by ritual law, Lyanna holds hers with her right hand while her left rests against her heart. It takes you nearly the entire morning service to understand what she's doing. Only when Confessor Matthias begins the litany of sacred verses, the call and response section where the congregation recites specific passages in sequence, do you notice the pattern? She's marking time with her fingertips against her chest, not randomly, but in careful rhythm with specific verses. When the congregation recites verse 12 of the devotional canon, "In his light we find guidance through darkness," she taps once against her heart. During verse 27, "In his wisdom we find purpose beyond ourselves," 2 taps. Verse 41, "In his mercy we find forgiveness for our failings," 3 taps. The numbers mean nothing to you initially, but as the service continues, you realize she's communicating. Not to the Emperor despite the facade of prayer, but to someone else. Someone who might be watching. Someone who might be listening for exactly this type of coded message. Someone like you. Your hands shake as you turn to the referenced verses in your own prayer book. Verse 12, chapter 7 of the devotional canon. But instead of reading the prescribed text, you notice something else, a tiny mark in the margin. so small it could be a printing flaw or a stain from years of use. Until you look closer and realize it's been made deliberately. A microscopic symbol that means nothing to anyone who hasn't been looking for it. A heart. Crude, simple, no larger than a grain of sand, but unmistakably a heart. You check verses 27 and 41. The same mark appears in both, hidden in the decorative margins where only someone specifically searching would ever notice them. Your pulse hammers as you understand what you're looking at, a communication system so subtle, so embedded in the infrastructure of imperial worship itself, that it's essentially invisible. She's not the first person to feel what you're feeling. Others have been here before, facing the same impossible situation, developing the same desperate innovations. And somehow, despite the surveillance and the suspicion and the grinding machinery of imperial control, they've found ways to reach across the darkness and touch each other. The service ends, and as 10,000 souls rise in unison, you make a decision that terrifies and exhilarates you in equal measure. You're going to answer. During the evening's secondary devotional, a smaller service attended by only a few hundred citizens from your residential block, you take your usual position and wait. Lyanna enters 12 minutes after the opening prayer, her movements careful and controlled, her attention apparently focused entirely on the ritual at hand. But when Confessor Aldrich begins the responsive verses, you watch her hands. Same pattern, same careful timing. Same coded message tapped out against her heart while her lips form the words of devotion that mask her real communication. This time, you're ready. When verse 12 comes around, you shift your position slightly, timing the movement with the congregation's ritual genuflection. When verse 27 arrives, you adjust your grip on your prayer book, letting your thumb brush against the page margin in a pattern that mirrors hers. And when verse 41 resonates through the chapel, you tap twice against your own chest, a response, a confirmation, an acknowledgement that her message has been received. The effect is immediate and terrifying. Lyanna's breathing changes just slightly, just enough that you can see her shoulders rise and fall in a rhythm that has nothing to do with prayer. She knows you're listening. She knows you understand. And in that moment of mutual recognition, both of you become complicit in something far more dangerous than individual heresy. You become conspirators. The next 3 weeks develop into a careful dance of communication that would be invisible to anyone not looking for it. You learn that Lyanna works in Archive Section 12, cataloging historical records and maintaining data files that few people ever access. Perfect cover for someone who needs to think, to plan, to develop systems of connection that exist beneath the notice of imperial surveillance. She's brilliant at it. Her codes become increasingly sophisticated. References to specific archive classifications that correspond to letters, filing sequences that spell out words when properly decoded, even a system based on the timing of her appearances at various public functions that allows for complex message construction across multiple days. You develop your own methods of response. Work assignment requests that put you in positions where she can observe your movements. Ration queue positioning that allows for brief moments of proximity. Even a system based on the pattern of your prayer book placement during services, closed, open to specific pages, oriented at particular angles, that creates a vocabulary complex enough for actual conversation. The first words you successfully communicate to each other are appropriately mundane. Are you well? And yes, thank you. But the emotional weight behind those simple phrases is staggering. In a society where individual concern for another person's welfare is considered potentially heretical, asking after someone's health becomes an act of rebellion. The breakthrough comes during your fourth successful exchange. You've managed to communicate that you work in manufacturing Bay 12, and she's responded that she has access to maintenance schedules for various sectors. It's the kind of information that could be useful for someone who wanted to predict when certain areas might be less heavily monitored. 3 days later, you receive your first work assignment modification in 15 years. A routine maintenance check in Archive Section 12, scheduled for the night shift when minimal personnel would be present. The kind of assignment that could easily be explained as bureaucratic efficiency or random scheduling. The kind of assignment that provides exactly 47 minutes of opportunity for two people to be in the same place with legitimate reasons for being there. You arrive at Archive Section 12 with your maintenance kit and a heart that feels like it might burst from your chest. The corridors here are narrower than in the manufacturing sections, lined with data storage units that hum with the quiet efficiency of Imperial technology. The lighting is dimmer, designed for the preservation of ancient documents rather than human comfort. She's waiting for you in Subarchive 7, standing beside a bank of cogitators with a data slate in her hands, looking for all the world like someone conducting routine inventory. But when she turns toward you, when her eyes meet yours without the barrier of crowds and distance and the pretense of prayer, the impact is overwhelming. "Citizen," she says softly, her voice carrying the formal tone required by protocol. "I trust you can complete your maintenance duties without disrupting the archive systems." "Of course, Citizen Corvus," you reply, setting down your toolkit with hands that shake slightly. "I'll be as efficient as possible." But neither of you moves toward your supposed duties. Instead, you stand there in the dim light of Subarchive 7, looking at each other with an intensity that would register on any surveillance equipment as dangerously elevated emotional engagement. The servoskulls are fewer here, designed for data protection rather than behavioral monitoring, but they're still present, still watching, still measuring. Neither of you cares. "I've been watching you," she whispers, so quietly that you have to step closer to hear. Close enough to catch the scent of regulation soap and the faint underlying fragrance that is uniquely her. Close enough to see the tiny scar on her left temple that speaks of childhood accident or violence. Close enough to understand that everything you've built in your careful, controlled life is about to change forever. "I know," you whisper back. "I've been watching you too." It's the first honest conversation you've had with another human being in 30 years. And in the archives beneath Hive Tertius, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of millennia and the ever-present threat of discovery, it feels like the most dangerous thing you've ever done. It also feels like coming alive. Interrogator Vex has been hunting lovers for 17 years. He stands now in Surveillance Chamber 7, reviewing the day's biometric reports with the cold precision that has made him the Inquisition's most effective tracker of emotional heresy in Sector 12. The data scrolls past on luminescent displays, heart rate spikes, galvanic skin response anomalies, microexpression analysis results from 10,000 citizens monitored during today's devotional services. Most of it is routine. Fear responses to servoskull proximity, normal and expected. Stress indicators during confession, acceptable within established parameters. Minor autonomic fluctuations during prayer recitation, consistent with standard devotional engagement. But there are anomalies. There are always anomalies. Subject 447 Alpha 12, male, age 30 standard manufacturing sector worker. Elevated cardiovascular activity during morning prayers, specifically during verses 12, 27, and 40, one of the devotional canon. Pupil dilation inconsistent with lighting conditions. Micromuscular tension in facial muscles suggesting suppressed emotional response. Subject 891 Beta 7, female, age 28 standard archive sector worker. Similar cardiovascular elevation during identical time periods. Respiratory pattern changes indicating heightened attention focus. Behavioral modification in prayer book handling suggesting coded communication attempt. Vex has seen this pattern before, many times. The initial stages of what the Hereticus Amatus classifies as Type 7 emotional heresy. The development of particular attachment between unrelated individuals. Left unchecked, it progresses through predictable stages, coded communication, clandestine meetings, physical contact, and ultimately the formation of pair bonds that represent direct competition with the subject's loyalty to the Emperor. In his 17 years of service, Vex has processed 847 such cases. Of those, 623 resulted in successful emotional reconditioning. 178 required more intensive intervention, including memory modification and neural pathway restructuring. 46 were deemed irredeemably corrupted and processed accordingly. He maintains detailed files on all of them. Not because the Inquisition requires such record-keeping. Once a case is closed, the subjects are expected to be forgotten, but because Vex has discovered that understanding the patterns of emotional corruption helps him identify future cases more efficiently. The patterns are remarkably consistent. Initial contact through shared ritual activities, development of coded communication systems, escalation to physical proximity. The inevitable progression toward activities that create psychic vulnerabilities exploitable by the enemies of mankind. What makes Vex particularly effective is his understanding of the psychological mechanics involved. He was not born into the Inquisition service. 20 years ago, he was Subject 1247 Delta 9 himself, a manufactorum supervisor who had developed an inappropriate attachment to a female worker in his sector. The correction process had been educational. He remembers, with the clinical detachment that proper reconditioning creates, the sensation of having emotional pathways surgically severed while remaining conscious throughout the procedure. He remembers the fascinating process by which the biomages identified and isolated the neural structures associated with particular attachment. Most interesting of all, he remembers the moment when his love for the woman, he can no longer recall her name or face, which is, as it should be, transformed from overwhelming personal urgency to abstract intellectual curiosity. The reconditioning had been so successful that, when offered the opportunity to join the Hereticus Amatus as an interrogator, he had accepted with genuine enthusiasm. Who better to hunt emotional heretics than someone who had experienced the corruption firsthand and been successfully purified of it? Now, studying the data from subjects 447 Alpha 12 and 891 Beta 7, he feels the familiar satisfaction of a puzzle clicking into place. They're in the early stages still, communication phase, possibly progressing toward first physical contact. Eminently salvageable, assuming intervention occurs within the next 2 to 3 weeks. He makes a note to increase surveillance density around both subjects. Additional servoskull coverage during off-duty periods. Detailed analysis of their work assignment patterns. Background investigation into their social connections to identify potential facilitators or other corrupted individuals. But as he reviews their profiles more carefully, Vex notices something that makes him pause. Both subjects show remarkably high efficiency ratings in their assigned duties. Both have exemplary records of Imperial compliance. Neither shows any indicators of traditional heretical activity. No interest in forbidden knowledge, no association with suspect individuals, no deviation from prescribed social norms. In other words, they're exactly the kind of citizens the Imperium needs most. Productive, loyal, reliable servants whose only flaw is their developing capacity to care about each other more than regulation allows. 17 years ago, before his correction, Vex might have felt something resembling sympathy for their situation. Now, he feels only professional interest in the challenge they present. High-value subjects require more delicate handling. Their loyalty to the Emperor is genuine, which means the emotional heresy is likely an aberration rather than systematic corruption. They can probably be saved. The question is whether they deserve to be. Vex pulls up the sector's broader surveillance data, looking for context. Manufacturing Bay 12 has been unusually productive lately, efficiency ratings up 12% over the previous quarter. Archive Section 12 has processed 23% more data requests than standard parameters suggest should be possible with current staffing levels. Interesting. Both sectors are performing above expectations, and both happen to house subjects showing signs of emotional corruption. Correlation or causation. He makes another note to investigate whether the subject's developing attachment might actually be enhancing their service to the Emperor rather than detracting from it. It's a disturbing possibility, the idea that love might somehow make humans more effective servants rather than less. If true, it would require significant revision of current doctrine. But that's a problem for the theo-philosophers to debate. Vex's job is simpler. Identify emotional heresy, contain it, and process the subjects according to established protocols. Whether that processing benefits the Imperium in the long run is above his security clearance to determine. He activates the observation network around both subjects and settles back to watch. In his experience, lovers always make mistakes. They grow careless as their attachment deepens. They take unnecessary risks. They prioritize each other's welfare over their own safety. And when they do, he'll be ready. Meanwhile, in Archive Section 12, you're discovering exactly how right Interrogator Vex is about the mistakes lovers make. 3 weeks of careful communication with Lyanna has led to increasingly frequent accidental encounters, work assignments that coincide, ration queue positioning that allows for brief conversations, shared presence at secondary devotionals where the surveillance is lighter. Each encounter has been perfectly justifiable, utterly explainable, and completely innocent by any objective measure. Each encounter has also been absolute torture. Because standing 3 meters away from someone you're falling in love with, speaking in carefully neutral tones about routine administrative matters while desperately wanting to touch them, to hold them, to whisper all the things that could get you both killed. It creates a specific kind of agony that you're beginning to understand is both the blessing and the curse of forbidden attachment. The worst part is how normal it feels. Despite the danger, despite the surveillance, despite the very real possibility that every conversation might be your last, being near Lyanna feels like the most natural thing in the universe. You find yourself anticipating her responses to your coded messages, recognizing the subtle shifts in her expression that indicate amusement or concern or affection. You've begun to notice things about her that no surveillance system could ever catalog. The way she unconsciously touches her temple when she's thinking deeply, the particular cadence of her breathing when she's nervous, the tiny smile she allows herself when she thinks no one is watching. You're learning her, in other words. Learning her in the way that humans have always learned each other, through attention and care, and the gradual accumulation of intimate knowledge. And every piece of information you gather makes the prospect of losing her more unbearable. Which is precisely when you realize you're being watched more closely than before. It starts with small things. A servoskull that seems to linger in your vicinity longer than standard patrol patterns would suggest. A fellow worker who asks unusually specific questions about your recent assignment modifications. A confessor who probes more deeply than usual during your monthly devotional consultation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that couldn't be explained as routine security measures or random variations in normal procedure. But after 3 weeks of hypervigilance, you've developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to the rhythms of Imperial surveillance. And those rhythms have changed. The confirmation comes during what should have been a routine maintenance assignment in Corridor 7 Alpha. You're replacing atmospheric regulators, legitimate work that requires several hours and provides cover for extending your presence in sectors adjacent to Archive Section 12. Perfectly normal, perfectly explainable, except that 20 minutes into the assignment, you notice the same servoskull passing your position every 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Patrol patterns are supposed to be randomized to prevent predictability. No surveillance device should repeat its route with that level of precision unless it's been specifically programmed to monitor a particular location or a particular person. You complete the maintenance work with mechanical efficiency while your mind races through the implications. If you're under active surveillance, then Lyanna probably is too. If they're watching both of you, then they've likely identified the pattern of your encounters. And if they've identified the pattern, then it's only a matter of time before they move from observation to intervention. That night, during evening prayers, you manage to communicate a single word through your established code system: danger. Lyanna's response, tapped out against her heart in the careful rhythm you've both mastered, is immediate and devastating. I know. 2 words that confirm your worst fears. You're both being hunted now. The machinery of the Hereticus Amatus has turned its attention toward your developing attachment, and every moment you spend in each other's presence increases the risk of discovery. The logical response would be to cease contact immediately. Cut all communication, avoid each other completely, hope that the surveillance protocols eventually classify you both as false positives, and move on to other targets. It's what any rational servant of the Emperor would do. Instead, 3 days later, you find yourself standing in Subarchive 7 again, ostensibly conducting another maintenance inspection, actually waiting for Lyanna with a desperation that has moved far beyond rational thought. Because you've realized something that Interrogator Vex, for all his expertise in hunting emotional heresy, has never understood. The Inquisition assumes that fear of punishment will override the impulse toward attachment. They believe that rational self-preservation will ultimately triumph over irrational emotional need. But they're wrong. Not because love makes people stupid, but because love makes people willing to pay prices that rational calculation says are too high. Standing in that archive, waiting for a woman whose presence might damn you both, you understand that you've moved beyond the realm of cost-benefit analysis. You're not choosing Lyanna despite the danger. You're choosing her because of it. Because in a universe where love itself is forbidden, the very act of loving becomes an assertion of humanity against the machines that would grind it away. When she appears in the doorway, her eyes finding yours across the dimly lit space, you know that she's made the same choice. The same impossible, irrational, utterly human decision to risk everything for the chance of connection. "They're watching us," she whispers as she moves to stand beside you, close enough that you could reach out and touch her hand. "I know," you whisper back. "We should stop. We should end this before it goes any further." "I know." Neither of you moves away. Neither of you suggests leaving. Instead, you stand there in the growing darkness of Subarchive 7, 2 people who have crossed the line from innocent attachment to active rebellion simply by refusing to surrender what you found. Somewhere above you, in Surveillance Chamber 7, Interrogator Vex watches the biometric readings spike as 2 of his subjects move from the communication phase to the commitment phase of emotional heresy. He makes a note that intervention will need to occur soon, within days rather than weeks. But he also notices something else in the data. Something that he files away for future consideration. Both subjects show declining fear responses even as surveillance intensity increases. Their stress indicators are dropping rather than rising, as if the prospect of discovery has become less frightening rather than more. It's an anomaly he's never seen before in 17 years of hunting lovers. And anomalies, in Vex's experience, are always the most dangerous thing of all. The sermons begin to change in the 6th week. Confessor Matthias, who has delivered the same rotating cycle of devotional messages for the past 12 years, suddenly introduces new themes into his morning addresses. Where once he spoke of duty and service, and the glorious sacrifice of individual will for the greater good of humanity, now he speaks of the particular dangers that face the faithful in these troubled times. "My brothers and sisters in service," he intones from the great pulpit of St. Macarius Cathedral, his voice echoing through the vast nave with the authority of centuries of imperial doctrine. "We live in an age when the enemies of mankind grow ever more subtle in their corruption. No longer do they come with the obvious taint of mutation or the crude symbols of heretical worship. Now they work through the very emotions that might seem most pure, most natural, most human." You kneel in your usual position, prayer book open to the prescribed page, eyes focused on the text with the discipline of decades of training. But every word Matthias speaks lands like a physical blow. Because you know, with the absolute certainty that comes from weeks of growing paranoia, that these sermons are not coincidental. They are targeted. They are meant for you. Love, the confessor continues, his voice taking on the particular tone that indicates the delivery of critical theological instruction, is the greatest gift the God Emperor has bestowed upon his children. But like all gifts, it can be perverted. It can be misdirected. When we allow ourselves to love that which is temporary rather than eternal, mortal rather than divine, particular rather than universal, we create within our souls a division of loyalty that the enemies of mankind are swift to exploit. Around you, 10,000 voices murmur the ritual response. In his love we find all loves perfected. Your own voice joins the chorus automatically, muscle memory taking over while your conscious mind reels with the implications of what you're hearing. The sermon is not just about general theological principles. It's about you, about Lyanna, about the specific heresy you've both committed by daring to care about each other more than regulation allows. The blessed Saint Cassius teaches us, Matthias continues, referencing a text you've heard quoted 1,000 times but never in this context, that the heart which admits two masters serves neither well. We cannot love the Emperor with the totality that he deserves while simultaneously lavishing that same love upon mere mortals who will pass from this existence like shadows at dawn. The sermon continues for another 43 minutes, but the message is clear. They know, not necessarily the details, not yet, but they know that somewhere in this congregation, someone is struggling with the temptation of particular attachment. Someone is allowing their devotion to be divided between the eternal master of mankind and the temporary comfort of human connection. Someone like you. After the service, as the congregation files out through the massive bronze doors, you catch sight of Lyanna 17 rows ahead. Her shoulders are rigid with tension, her movement mechanical in a way that suggests she's fighting to maintain composure. She heard the same message you did. She drew the same conclusions. But it's during the evening's secondary devotional that the real horror begins to unfold. Confessor Aldrich, who normally restricts himself to brief readings from the uplifting primer, instead delivers an extended theological lecture on what he terms the heresy of particularity. And as he speaks, you begin to understand that the Imperium's campaign against love is not merely pragmatic policy. It's sophisticated theology, developed over millennia and refined through the accumulated wisdom of humanity's greatest religious minds. Consider, Aldrich says, his voice carrying the quiet intensity that makes his smaller congregation lean forward to catch every word, the mathematics of devotion. The human heart, blessed though it is with the capacity for love, remains finite in its scope. Every emotion we direct toward a fellow mortal is emotion that could otherwise be directed toward the Emperor. Every moment we spend in concern for one particular individual is a moment stolen from contemplation of his infinite glory. The logic is elegant, terrifying, and utterly compelling, because it's not wrong exactly. The human capacity for emotional engagement is limited. Love is a finite resource, and in a universe where humanity's survival depends on absolute unity of purpose and total dedication to the imperial cause, any division of loyalty really could represent an existential threat. But surely, a voice calls out from the congregation, a brave soul willing to ask the question that everyone is thinking. Surely the Emperor does not begrudge his children the comfort of companionship. Surely love between humans, properly directed, can serve his greater glory. Aldrich's smile is gentle, patient, and absolutely chilling. An excellent question, citizen. Let me answer it by referring to the writings of Saint Euphrates Keeler, one of the first and greatest of the Emperor's faithful servants. He opens a massive leather-bound tome and reads, "In the early days of our understanding, we believed that love multiplied rather than divided, that caring for one another somehow enhanced our capacity for devotion to him. but experience has taught us otherwise. Experience has shown us that particular attachments create spiritual vulnerabilities that can be exploited by the enemies of mankind. The heart that loves a mortal soul creates a doorway through which corruption may enter. Better to love only him who is incorruptible, eternal, and worthy of complete trust. The theological foundation is unshakable. Not because it's necessarily true, but because it's been built upon 10,000 years of imperial experience, refined through countless encounters with the actual enemies of humanity, tested against the reality of a universe where emotions really can become weapons in the hands of malevolent entities. And as you sit there in the flickering candlelight of the evening service, you realize that your rebellion against imperial emotional policy is not just personal defiance, it's theological heresy. You're not just breaking rules, you're challenging the fundamental doctrinal assumptions upon which human civilization has been built for millennia. The weight of that realization is crushing, because it forces you to confront questions that have no comfortable answers. What if the Imperium is right? What if your growing love for Lyanna really is creating the kind of spiritual vulnerability that could endanger not just your own soul, but the souls of everyone around you? What if the very feelings that make you feel most human are actually the tools by which inhuman entities could unmake humanity itself? 3 days later, these questions become more than academic when you discover that Lyanna has been conducting her own theological research. Your next meeting occurs in Subarchive 7, ostensibly for routine maintenance of the atmospheric control systems. But when you arrive, you find her waiting with a stack of ancient texts that she's pulled from the deepest levels of the archive system. Documents so old that they require special environmental protection just to be handled safely. "I've been reading," she says without preamble, her voice tight with a tension you've never heard before. "Going back to the earliest imperial records, before the Hereticus Imatus, before the emotional purity protocols, back to the time when the Emperor walked among humanity and spoke his intentions directly." She opens the topmost text, a fragment of something that might be pre-unification Terra records, the writing so archaic that it requires trained scholarship to decode. Look at this. From the Chronicle of Unity, written during the earliest days of imperial expansion. The Master of Mankind spoke thus, that love between his children should serve as the foundation upon which his great work would be built, that the bonds of affection which unite humanity should become the strength by which the galaxy would be reclaimed from darkness. Your hands shake as you read the passage, because if it's authentic, if these are actual records of the Emperor's original intentions, then everything the current Imperium teaches about emotional attachment is not just wrong. It's the complete opposite of what was originally intended. There's more, Lyanna continues, turning pages with the careful precision of someone trained in archival preservation. References to imperial policy during the Great Crusade that actively encourage strong emotional bonds between humans. Marriage ceremonies conducted by Space Marine chaplains. Family units given special protection during planetary compliance operations. Even indications that the Emperor himself maintained personal attachments to specific individuals among his servants. The implications are staggering, because if the current doctrine of emotional suppression is a deviation from the Emperor's original vision rather than its fulfillment, then you and Lyanna are not heretics. You're loyalists. You're following the true imperial way, while the Inquisition has somehow been corrupted into enforcing the opposite of what the Master of Mankind actually intended. But even as hope flares in your chest, Lyanna shows you the other documents, the ones that explain how everything changed. "The Horus Heresy," she whispers, her finger tracing lines of text that chronicle humanity's greatest catastrophe. "It's all here. How Horus used his emotional bonds with his brother Primarchs as weapons against them. How Fulgrim's love for beauty and perfection became the avenue through which Slaanesh corrupted him. How Magnus's affection for forbidden knowledge opened the doorway for Tzeentch's influence. Every major betrayal of the heresy began with an emotional attachment, that was twisted into a tool of corruption. The historical record is clear, terrible, and utterly convincing. The Emperor's original vision of humanity, united by love, had been tested in the crucible of galactic civil war and found catastrophically wanting. The enemies of mankind had proved, again and again, that they could weaponize human emotional bonds with devastating effectiveness. So the Imperium learned, Lyanna continues, her voice hollow with the weight of understanding. They learned that love really is dangerous, that emotional attachments really do create vulnerabilities, that the only way to protect humanity from having its own feelings turned against it is to systematically eliminate those feelings entirely. You stare at the ancient texts spread across the archive table, feeling the last foundations of your rebellion crumbling beneath the weight of historical evidence. Because the terrible truth is that both versions of imperial doctrine are correct. The Emperor's original vision was beautiful and true and worthy of devotion. The current Imperium's emotional suppression policies are logical and necessary and justified by 10 millennia of bitter experience. The tragedy is not that humanity has abandoned love. The tragedy is that love itself has been corrupted into a weapon, leaving humanity with no choice but to abandon it in self-defense. What do we do? You ask, your voice barely audible in the silence of the archive chamber. Lyanna closes the ancient texts with careful precision, her movements mechanical and controlled. I don't know, she admits. The doctrine is clear. The historical justification is overwhelming. Every rational analysis suggests that what we're doing is genuinely dangerous, not just to ourselves but to everyone around us. She pauses, looking at you with an expression that contains all the weight of impossible choice. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel more human than I've ever felt before, more alive. And I can't help but wonder if a humanity that survives by abandoning everything that makes it human is still worth saving. It's the question that lies at the heart of everything. The question that the Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to answer through doctrine and policy, and the systematic reshaping of human nature itself. Is it better to live as diminished humans who can serve the Emperor effectively, or to risk damnation for the chance to remain fully human? As you sit there in the growing darkness of Subarchive 7, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of millennia and the weight of impossible theological complexity, you realize that there is no correct answer. There are only choices, each carrying prices that rational calculation cannot measure. And the choice you make, sitting there with Lyanna in the shadow of 10,000 years of imperial history, is to remain human despite the cost. Not because it's wise, but because it's the only choice that allows you to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back, even if that person is, by every reasonable measure, a heretic. The betrayal comes from the person you trust most in the world. Marcus Aurelius Kine has been your closest friend for 15 years. You've worked the same shifts in Manufacturing Bay 12, shared the same ration queues, attended the same devotional services. He's the man who helped you through the difficult period after your parents' death, who covered your duties during the fever sickness that nearly claimed you 3 years ago, who has been the closest thing to a brother that imperial policy allows. He's also, you discover with crushing finality, the one who turns you in. The realization comes in pieces, assembled over the course of 3 terrible days like the fragments of a shattered life, slowly reassembling into a picture you don't want to see. First piece, Marcus begins asking questions about your recent work assignments. Casual questions, the kind a friend might ask out of genuine interest. But there's something different in the way he phrases them, a precision that suggests he's following a script rather than satisfying curiosity. Those maintenance duties in the archive sections must be interesting, he says during the midday meal break, his voice carrying the exact tone of casual conversation. Different from the usual manufacturing work. Do you enjoy the change of pace? It's perfectly innocent. It's also exactly the kind of question someone would ask if they were trying to establish a timeline of your activities for official purposes. Second piece, you notice Marcus paying unusual attention to your behavior during devotional services. Not obviously watching, he's too skilled for that, but you catch him glancing in your direction during moments when your focus shifts toward Lyanna's position in the congregation. Brief looks that last just long enough to register your line of sight, your posture, your micro-expressions. The kind of observation that someone trained in surveillance techniques might conduct if they were documenting behavioral patterns for later analysis. Third piece, Marcus volunteers for evening shift coverage that coincidentally aligns with several of your recent maintenance assignments in sectors adjacent to Archive Section 12. Pure chance, he explains. The foreman needed additional coverage, and he's always willing to serve the Emperor's glory through extra duty. But you've worked with Marcus long enough to know his patterns, his preferences, his carefully maintained work-life balance. He doesn't volunteer for additional shifts unless there's a compelling reason. And the only compelling reason you can imagine is if someone has requested that he monitor your activities during off-duty hours. The final piece comes when you return to your hab block after what should have been a routine evening shift and find Marcus waiting in the common area with an expression you've never seen before. Not anger, exactly, and not sadness. Something worse. The look of someone who has made a decision that will destroy everything he cares about because he believes it's the right thing to do. "We need to talk," he says quietly. You know, with the absolute certainty that comes from 15 years of friendship, that this is the last conversation you'll ever have as free citizens. He leads you to Meditation Chamber 7, a small room used for private prayer and confession. Officially, it's one of the few spaces in the hab block not under active surveillance, a concession to the spiritual privacy that Imperial doctrine theoretically protects. In practice, you suspect that assumption is dangerously naive. But Marcus talks as if privacy doesn't matter, as if he's already moved beyond caring who might be listening. "I know about the woman," he says without preamble. "I know about the meetings in the archive sections. I know about the coded communications during prayer services. I know about all of it." Your first instinct is denial, but the look in his eyes stops you. This isn't an accusation seeking confirmation. This is a statement of established fact. "How long have you known?" You ask instead. 6 weeks, Marcus replies. "Since the first time I saw your biometric readings spike during morning prayers. Since I noticed the pattern of your work assignment modifications. Since I realized that my oldest friend had fallen victim to the most dangerous heresy imaginable." 6 weeks. The same period during which your relationship with Lyanna has developed from tentative communication to deep emotional attachment. Marcus has been watching, documenting, analyzing your descent into emotional heresy from the very beginning. "I reported it 3 days ago," he continues, his voice steady despite the tears that have begun to track down his face. "Filed a complete dossier with the Hereticus Amatus. Surveillance recordings, behavioral analysis, timeline reconstruction. Everything they need to process both you and Citizen Corvus according to established protocols. The betrayal is complete, devastating, and utterly incomprehensible, because Marcus is crying, not from guilt or shame or fear of consequences, but from genuine grief. He's destroying your life and he's heartbroken about it. Why? You manage to ask. "Because I love you," Marcus says, and the words hit like a physical blow. "Because you're the best man I've ever known, and I couldn't stand by and watch the enemies of mankind turn that goodness into a weapon against humanity. Because whatever you think you feel for that woman, it's not worth your soul, and it's certainly not worth the risk you're creating for everyone around you." The theological justification pours out of him like water from a broken dam. Everything the confessors have taught about particular attachment and divided loyalty and the spiritual vulnerabilities that emotional bonds create. Everything you've read in Lyanna's ancient texts about the historical precedents and the necessity of current policy. Everything that makes perfect, logical, utterly compelling sense if you accept the fundamental premise that love is corruption. The Inquisition will be merciful, Marcus continues, his voice taking on the desperate tone of someone trying to convince himself as much as you. Your service record is exemplary. Your loyalty to the Emperor is unquestioned. They'll recondition you both, eliminate the corrupted emotional pathways, allow you to continue serving humanity as productive citizens. It's not death. It's not even punishment, really. It's healing. You stare at your oldest friend, the man who has just condemned you to a fate worse than death out of genuine love and concern for your welfare, and realize that this is what the Imperium's emotional policies have created. A society so fundamentally broken that betrayal becomes an act of compassion, where turning in the people you care about most becomes the highest expression of friendship. Marcus truly believes he's saving you, and according to every measure that Imperial doctrine provides, he's absolutely right. The arrest comes 18 hours later. You're in Manufacturing Bay 12, completing a routine assembly task when the arbitrators arrive. 6 of them, armored in the black carapace that marks them as inquisitorial enforcement, moving with the mechanical precision that speaks of augmetic enhancement. They don't speak, don't explain, don't provide any justification beyond the authority inherent in their presence. They simply activate restraint fields around your workstation and escort you from the bay with the efficient brutality that characterizes all Imperial justice. The other workers don't look up from their tasks. They don't ask questions. They don't show any sign of curiosity or concern about your sudden disappearance, because everyone understands what arbitrator involvement means, and everyone knows that the safest response is to pretend nothing has happened. By evening shift, your workstation will be assigned to someone else. By the next day, your name will be struck from the duty rosters. Within a week, it will be as if you never existed at all. The transport to the inquisitorial facility takes 47 minutes through the twisting corridors of Hive Tertius's middle levels. You spend that time thinking about Lyanna, wondering if she's already been taken or if she's still free, still unaware that her world is about to end. You think about Marcus, probably back at his workstation, trying to convince himself that he's done the right thing. You think about all the small moments of happiness you've stolen over the past few weeks, and whether they were worth the price you're about to pay. By the time the transport stops at Facility 7 Omega, you've reached a conclusion that surprises you with its clarity. Yes, every moment was worth it. Even knowing where it leads, even understanding the consequences, you wouldn't change a single decision you've made since that first glance across the cathedral. Because for 6 weeks, you were fully human. And in a universe that seems determined to grind humanity down to its most efficient components, that might be the greatest rebellion of all. The inquisitorial facility is exactly what you expected. Sterile corridors lined with holding cells. Interrogation chambers equipped with devices whose purposes you don't want to contemplate. And the omnipresent hum of machinery designed to process heretics with industrial efficiency. They separate you from Lyanna immediately. You catch a glimpse of her being led down a different corridor, her wrists bound with the same restraint fields that hold you, her face pale but composed. She doesn't struggle, doesn't call out, doesn't waste energy on futile gestures of defiance. But when her eyes meet yours across the facility's central processing chamber, you see everything you need to know. She's not broken. She's not repentant. And if she had the choice to make again, she would make the same decision you would. The love that brought you here is still intact, still burning, still worth every consequence it's about to bring. Which, you realize as the interrogators begin their work, is probably the most dangerous thing of all. Interrogator Vex enters Cell 7 Alpha with the confident stride of a man who has conducted this interview 847 times before. You've been in inquisitorial custody for 72 hours now, long enough for the isolation and uncertainty to begin their psychological work, but not so long as to risk genuine deterioration of cognitive function. The timing is precisely calculated. Everything Vex does is precisely calculated. He carries with him a data slate containing your complete psychological profile, compiled from 17 years of surveillance data, work performance reviews, and the detailed reports that Marcus provided during his debriefing sessions. The picture it paints is of a model imperial citizen who has suffered a tragic but correctable lapse in judgment. Citizen 447 Alpha 12, Vex says, settling into the chair across from your restraint frame with the casual ease of routine. Or may I call you by your given name? I find that personal address helps facilitate honest communication. The courtesy is unexpected, disarming in its apparent genuineness. You've prepared yourself for torture, for aggressive interrogation, for the kind of brutal psychological assault that rumors say the Inquisition employs against suspected heretics. Instead, you're facing a middle-aged man with kind eyes who speaks to you as if you're a patient rather than a prisoner. I know this situation must be terrifying, Vex continues, consulting his data slate with the manner of a physician reviewing medical charts. 17 years of loyal service to the Emperor, an exemplary record of imperial compliance, and now you find yourself in an inquisitorial facility facing charges of emotional heresy. The cognitive dissonance must be overwhelming. It is, because nothing about this matches your expectations of inquisitorial justice. There are no torture devices visible in the cell, no obvious instruments of coercion. Just 2 chairs, a simple table, and lighting that approximates natural daylight rather than the harsh illumination you expected. Most disturbing of all, Vex seems genuinely concerned about your welfare. Let me explain what's going to happen, he says, setting down the data slate and leaning forward with the posture of someone sharing important information. You've been charged with Type 7 emotional heresy, the formation of particular attachment that interferes with proper devotion to the Emperor. Under normal circumstances, this would result in immediate reconditioning, surgical and chemical modification of neural pathways to eliminate the capacity for corrupted emotional response. The words hit like physical blows, but Vex delivers them with the gentle tone of someone explaining a routine medical procedure. However, he continues, your case presents unusual circumstances. Your service record indicates genuine loyalty to the Imperium. Your psychological profile shows no indicators of systematic corruption or anti-imperial sentiment. Most importantly, your friend Marcus Kine has provided testimony suggesting that your emotional attachment developed spontaneously rather than through external manipulation. Marcus, the name brings a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a grudging understanding that he really did believe he was helping you. This means, Vex explains, that you're eligible for what we call merciful correction. Instead of standard reconditioning, which eliminates emotional capacity entirely, you would undergo selective modification. We would remove only the specific neural pathways associated with your attachment to Citizen Corvus, leaving the rest of your emotional range intact. You would retain the capacity for appropriate affection, love for the Emperor, loyalty to the Imperium, even friendship with approved individuals. You would simply be unable to form the kind of dangerous particular attachment that brought you here. The offer hangs in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, because what Vex is describing isn't the complete lobotomization you feared. It's surgical precision applied to emotional correction, the removal of one specific vulnerability while leaving everything else intact. More than that, Vex continues, successful completion of merciful correction would qualify you for advancement within the imperial hierarchy. Your demonstrated loyalty, combined with your experience of emotional corruption and subsequent purification, would make you an ideal candidate for the Hereticus Amatus itself. You could serve the Emperor by helping identify and correct others who suffer from the same affliction that nearly destroyed you. The seduction is masterful, not just survival but promotion, Not just correction, but transformation into a hunter of the very corruption you once embodied. A chance to take the terrible experience you're enduring and turn it into service to humanity's greater good. I need you to understand, Vex says, his voice taking on an urgency that seems completely genuine, that this offer is extraordinary. Most subjects of emotional heresy don't receive such consideration, but your case has attracted attention at the highest levels of the Inquisition. There are those who believe that citizens like you, fundamentally loyal but temporarily corrupted, represent the greatest potential assets for combating this type of heresy. He pauses, studying your face with the attention of someone genuinely interested in your response. All you have to do is acknowledge that your attachment to Citizen Corvus was a mistake. Recognize that it represented a division of loyalty that could have been exploited by the enemies of mankind. Accept that correction is necessary for your own spiritual welfare and the safety of those around you. The silence stretches between you, filled with the weight of impossible choice, because what Vex is offering isn't just reasonable, it's merciful by any standard you can imagine. A chance to survive with most of your personality intact, an opportunity to transform tragedy into service, a way forward that acknowledges your fundamental loyalty while correcting the aberration that threatened to destroy it. Any rational person would accept immediately. What about Lyanna? You ask instead. Vex's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in the quality of his attention. Citizen Corvus is receiving the same offer, he says carefully. Her service record is equally exemplary, her loyalty equally unquestioned. She faces the same choice you do. And if we both accept correction, then you would both continue your service to the Emperor as productive citizens. You would likely be assigned to different sectors. Continued proximity might risk recontamination, but you would both live, both serve, both contribute to humanity's greater glory. It's everything you could hope for under the circumstances, everything rational calculation suggests you should want. Survival, purpose, even a kind of redemption through service. The only price is Lyanna, not her life. Vex has made it clear that she'll survive the process. But the woman you've fallen in love with, the person who has made you feel more human than you've ever felt before, the connection that has transformed your understanding of what it means to be alive, all of that would be surgically excised from your mind as efficiently as a tumor. You would remember her intellectually, the way you might remember any coworker or casual acquaintance. You might even feel grateful that she's safe and continuing her service to the Emperor. But the love that brought you here, the emotion that has defined the most meaningful weeks of your life, would be gone as completely as if it had never existed. I need to think about it, you say finally. Vex nods with understanding. Of course, it's a significant decision. Take all the time you need, within reason, of course. The correction procedures are scheduled for tomorrow evening, so I'll need your answer by morning prayers. He stands to leave, then pauses at the cell door as if struck by an afterthought. One more thing, he says, turning back with an expression of genuine curiosity. I'm interested in your perspective on something. Do you believe your attachment to Citizen Corvus made you a better servant of the Emperor or a worse one? The question catches you off guard, not because it's unexpected, but because it forces you to examine something you haven't wanted to think about. Better, you say after a moment of consideration. How so? Because loving her made me understand what we're fighting for. Before, serving the Emperor was duty. Important duty, necessary duty, but still just obligation. Now I understand that we're not just preserving humanity's existence, we're preserving humanity's capacity for connection, for meaning, for the things that make life worth living. Vex considers this for a long moment. But doesn't that suggest that your loyalty has become conditional, that you serve the Emperor now not for his own sake, but because you believe his cause aligns with your personal values? The theological trap is elegant and terrifying, because Vex is right, your motivation has changed. You no longer serve the Emperor out of pure obedience. You serve him because you believe his cause is worth serving, which means your loyalty has become a choice rather than an absolute. And choices, by definition, can be revoked. Perhaps, Vex continues, that's why particular attachments are so dangerous. Not because they divide loyalty, but because they create the illusion that loyalty is a matter of personal judgment rather than absolute duty. What happens when your personal values and the Emperor's will diverge? What happens when the choice you make is wrong? He doesn't wait for an answer. The cell door closes with the soft hiss of magnetic locks engaging, leaving you alone with questions that have no comfortable answers. Because as you sit there in the sterile silence of Cell 7 Alpha, you realize that Vex has identified the true heresy at the heart of your situation. It's not that you love Lyanna. It's that loving Lyanna has made you believe you have the right to judge whether that love is worth preserving. And in the Imperium of man, the right to make such judgments belongs to the Emperor alone. You wake up in Medical Bay 7 with no memory of the surgery itself, which is probably a mercy. The biomages explain that full consciousness during emotional reconditioning can cause severe psychological trauma, so they maintained you in a state of aware unconsciousness throughout the procedure. You could hear everything, understand what was happening, even provide responses when necessary, but the memories were prevented from forming permanent engrams. The result is a strange sense of discontinuity, as if you've lost several hours of your life to a dreamless sleep from which you've awakened fundamentally changed. The first thing you notice is the absence. Not physical pain. The Imperium's medical technology is far too advanced to leave you with crude surgical discomfort. But there's a hollow space in your mind where something used to be. Something important. Something that, intellectually, you know was central to your identity just days ago. You remember Lyanna Corvus. You remember the woman from Archive Section 12 who developed an inappropriate attachment to you, leading to your mutual correction by the Hereticus Amatus. You remember the surveillance, the investigation, the arrest. You even remember making the decision to undergo merciful correction rather than standard reconditioning. But you can't remember why any of it mattered. The emotional weight that once accompanied thoughts of her is simply gone. When you picture her face, you feel nothing more than you might feel when recalling any other citizen you've encountered in the course of your duties. Pleasant enough, certainly. A competent archive worker by all accounts. Someone you might nod to politely if you passed her in the corridor. Nothing more. The biomage conducting your post-surgical evaluation. A thin woman whose augmetic eyes glow with the cold efficiency of Imperial technology seems pleased with the results. Optimal outcome, she notes, reviewing the readings from the diagnostic equipment attached to your temple. Neural pathway severance is complete with no indication of residual emotional resonance. Cognitive function remains at baseline parameters. Memory retention of factual information is unimpaired. You should experience no difficulty returning to full productivity within the standard recovery period. She pauses, consulting additional data on her cogitator screen. There is one additional matter. Interrogator Vex has requested a post-correction interview before your return to regular duties. Purely routine, but it will determine your final disposition within the Imperial hierarchy. 3 days later, you find yourself back in the same interrogation cell where Vex first explained your options. But everything feels different now. Where once you approached these encounters with dread and desperate hope, now you feel only mild curiosity about what assignment you'll receive next. Vex enters with the same confident stride, the same data slate, the same expression of professional interest. But something in his manner suggests that this interview serves a different purpose than the last. How do you feel? He asks without preamble. Grateful, you reply, and the answer is completely honest. Grateful to the Emperor for his mercy. Grateful to the Inquisition for the correction that saved me from corruption. Grateful for the opportunity to continue serving humanity's cause. Vex makes notes on his data slate. Do you remember Citizen Corvus? Yes, the archive worker who was corrupted alongside me. I hope her correction was equally successful. It was. She returned to her duties yesterday with a commendable attitude adjustment. No residual attachment indicators. Complete acceptance of Imperial doctrine regarding emotional regulation. The information provides a pleasant sense of satisfaction. Knowing that a fellow citizen has been successfully restored to productive service is always gratifying. That's excellent news, Interrogator. The Emperor's mercy truly knows no bounds. Indeed, Vex sets down his data slate and leans forward with the same posture he adopted during your previous conversation. But his next question catches you completely off guard. Do you miss it? Miss what, Interrogator? The way you felt before correction, the emotional intensity, the sense of meaning and connection that your attachment provided. You consider the question carefully, examining your memories with the analytical detachment that proper Imperial conditioning provides. I remember that the corruption created a false sense of significance, but false significance is still falsehood, regardless of how compelling it might seem to the corrupted mind. I'm grateful to be free of such delusions. But you acknowledge that those delusions felt meaningful at the time. Of course, that's what makes emotional heresy so dangerous. The corruption feels like enhancement rather than diminishment. It's only from the perspective of correction that one can recognize how thoroughly it had compromised one's judgment. Vex makes more notes, his expression unreadable. I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. The individual who reported your corruption, Marcus Kine, has since submitted a request for voluntary emotional evaluation. The information is mildly interesting, but you're not sure why Vex considers it significant enough to mention. Has he shown indicators of similar corruption? No, quite the opposite. His surveillance records show complete emotional stability. No inappropriate attachments, no divided loyalties, no deviation from prescribed psychological parameters. He's a model Imperial citizen by every measure we can apply. Then why the evaluation request? Because he's concerned that his emotional response to reporting you was insufficient. He feels he should have experienced more distress at the necessity of betraying someone he considered a close friend. The fact that he was able to fulfill his duty to the Emperor without significant psychological conflict suggests to him that his emotional range might be inadequately developed. You process this information with the same analytical clarity you bring to all your duties, an admirable dedication to Imperial service. Many citizens would benefit from such thorough self-examination. Yes, Vex agrees, admirable, and also perfectly predictable, because that's what the current system creates, citizens so thoroughly conditioned against emotional attachment that they worry when they don't feel enough pain at causing suffering to others. There's something in his tone that suggests significance beyond the mere reporting of facts. You wait for him to continue, applying the patience that 17 years of Imperial service has taught you. Tell me, Vex says finally, what do you think the Emperor's ultimate goal is for humanity? The question is straightforward enough that you answer without hesitation. The preservation and advancement of the human species, the reclamation of the galaxy from the forces of darkness, the establishment of a civilization that can endure until the end of time itself. And do you believe the current system, the systematic suppression of emotional attachment, the active elimination of love and personal connection, serves that goal effectively? It's a more complex question, requiring careful consideration of policy implications and long-term strategic thinking. The system has maintained Imperial stability for 10 millennia. It has prevented the kind of emotional vulnerabilities that the enemies of mankind might exploit. By any objective measure, it has been remarkably successful. But do you think it's what the Emperor intended? The question carries implications that make you uncomfortable in ways you can't quite identify. Because you remember reading, in those ancient archive documents, suggestions that the Emperor's original vision might have been different from current policy. But you also remember that those same documents showed how emotional attachments had been weaponized during the Horus Heresy, necessitating the current approach. I think, you say carefully, that the Emperor's intentions must be understood in the context of 10,000 years of practical experience. What might have been possible in more innocent times may not be feasible given the realities we face today. Vex nods approvingly, a sophisticated analysis, and one that brings me to the reason for this interview. He retrieves a datapad from his robes and slides it across the table toward you. The document it displays bears the seal of the Inquisition and authorization codes that indicate the highest levels of security clearance. You're being offered a position within the Hereticus Amatus, he explains. Specifically, as an interrogator specializing in Type 7 emotional heresy cases. Your personal experience with the corruption, combined with your successful correction and demonstrated analytical capabilities, makes you uniquely qualified for this role. The opportunity is extraordinary. Advancement within the Inquisition represents not just professional success, but recognition of exceptional service to the Emperor's cause. The chance to use your experience to help other corrupted citizens achieve the same correction you've received. I'm honored by the offer, you say sincerely. May I ask what my duties would entail? Investigation, identification, and processing of citizens who display indicators of inappropriate emotional attachment. You would work with surveillance teams to analyze behavioral patterns, conduct interviews with suspected heretics, and oversee correction procedures. Essentially, you would do for others what was done for you. It's perfect symmetry, using the knowledge gained through your own fall and redemption to prevent others from experiencing the same corruption, turning your personal tragedy into service to humanity's greater good. I accept, you say without hesitation. Vex smiles, but there's something in his expression that doesn't match the apparent satisfaction of successful recruitment. Excellent. There's one final matter to address. As part of your new duties, you'll be assigned to investigate a case that shares certain similarities with your own situation. He activates a holographic display that shows surveillance footage from what appears to be a manufacturing facility. Two figures move through the frame, workers conducting routine maintenance tasks with the efficiency that Imperial training provides. But something in their movements, their positioning, their subtle interactions suggests coordination that goes beyond mere professional cooperation. Citizens 1247 Gamma 3 and 891 Delta 9, Vex explains. Both exemplary servants with outstanding service records, both showing indicators of developing particular attachment. The same pattern you and Citizen Corvus displayed 6 weeks ago. You study the footage with professional interest, noting the behavioral anomalies that mark these citizens for inquisitorial attention. The slightly elevated biometric readings during their interactions, the subtle modifications in work patterns that create opportunities for extended contact, the micro-expressions that suggest emotional investment beyond appropriate professional concern. Classic Type 7 progression, you observe. They're still in the early communication phase, but the indicators are unmistakable. They'll need intervention within 2 to 3 weeks before the corruption becomes irreversible. Precisely, and I want you to handle their case personally. Consider it your first practical examination as an interrogator. The assignment is both honor and test, proof that the Inquisition trusts your analytical capabilities while providing opportunity to demonstrate your complete recovery from emotional corruption. Investigating others who suffer from the same heresy that once afflicted you will confirm that your correction was thorough and permanent. I'll begin surveillance review immediately, you promise. Excellent. Vex deactivates the holographic display and gathers his materials. One last thing. The male subject, Citizen 1247 Gamma 3, shares certain biographical similarities with your own background. Similar age, similar work history, even similar psychological profile indicators. When you interview him, you may find the experience familiar. Something in his tone suggests significance beyond mere professional observation, but you can't identify what that significance might be, so you simply nod acknowledgement and prepare to leave for your new assignment. As you walk through the corridors of the inquisitorial facility toward your new office, you feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The Emperor's mercy has not only saved you from corruption, but transformed you into an instrument of salvation for others. Your fall from grace has become the foundation for service at the highest levels of imperial society. It's only later, as you review the surveillance files on citizens 1247 Gamma-3 and 891 Delta-9, that you begin to understand what Interrogator Vex was trying to tell you. Because watching their careful communications, their growing attachment, their desperate attempts to connect despite the surveillance that surrounds them, you recognize something that makes your analytical detachment waver for just a moment. You recognize yourself, not as you are now, purified, corrected, devoted to the Emperor's service with appropriate emotional regulation, but as you were 6 weeks ago when you first looked across a cathedral and felt your heart respond to another person's presence with dangerous intensity. For just an instant, watching these two citizens stumble toward the same corruption that once claimed you, you feel something that might be memory. Not of facts, those remain perfectly clear, but of weight, of significance, of the sense that what's happening between them matters in ways that transcend imperial policy and inquisitorial procedure. The feeling passes quickly, suppressed by the conditioning that keeps your emotions properly regulated. But it leaves behind a question that you can't quite dismiss. If the love between these citizens is corruption that must be eliminated, why does watching them remind you of something you wish you could remember? The question troubles you for exactly 17 seconds. Then your imperial training reasserts itself, and you return to the vital work of hunting the human heart in service to the Emperor's eternal glory. Somewhere else in the facility, in another office reviewing other surveillance files, sits a woman named Lyanna Corvus. She's been assigned to investigate a different case of emotional heresy. Two citizens from the textile district who have begun showing signs of inappropriate attachment. Like you, she approaches her work with the analytical precision that proper correction provides. Like you, she feels only appropriate satisfaction at the opportunity to serve the Emperor by eliminating corruption in others. But sometimes, when she reviews surveillance footage of couples in the early stages of attachment, something flickers behind her eyes. A momentary pause that suggests recognition of something important. Something that was once central to her identity, but now exists only as a hollow space where meaning used to live. She suppresses these moments with the efficiency that imperial conditioning provides. Returns to her work with renewed focus. Continues the vital task of preserving humanity by systematically destroying everything that makes humans human. Because in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is no love. There is only duty. And perhaps, in a universe where emotions can literally damn souls, that's the greatest mercy of all. The machinery of the Imperium grinds ever onward, processing millions of souls through its careful mechanisms of observation and correction. Love is identified, isolated, and eliminated with the precision of a surgical procedure. Citizens are purified, restored to productive service, transformed from potential heretics into hunters of heresy itself. The system works exactly as designed. Humanity survives, serves, and endures in the face of enemies that would use its own emotions as weapons against it. The only cost is the gradual transformation of the human species into something else entirely, something efficient, something stable, something that can serve the Emperor's cause for eternity without the messy complications of personal attachment or individual meaning, something that is no longer quite human, but survival, the Imperium teaches, is worth any price. Even the price of humanity itself. And in the end, perhaps that lesson is the most human thing of all, the willingness to sacrifice everything, including what makes us human, for the chance that something of us might endure until the stars burn out. In His name, we find purpose. In His light, we find truth. In His service, we find salvation, even if salvation requires us to forget why any of it was worth saving in the first place.